It's 19 of August, 1945. The rain fell softly over the barbed wire fences of the American prisoner of war camp in Texas. The soil was red and damp. The air filled with the scent of wet grass and smoke from the soldiers' cigarettes. Trucks rumbled through the muddy road, stopping near the gates, where a group of weary women stepped down. German female POWS, their faces pale, uniforms torn, and eyes heavy with fear. Among them was Lissel, a 23-year-old nurse from Munich. She clutched her small bag tightly. It held only a photograph of her mother and a tiny wooden cross. She didn't know what to expect. Back in Europe, she had heard stories that American camps were harsh, that women prisoners were treated with cruelty, that life after capture was filled with humiliation and cold indifference. But as she stepped off the truck, her eyes caught something strange. Smiles. The American soldiers standing guard didn't glare or shout. One of them, a tall man with blue eyes and a southern accent, even helped an older German woman down from the vehicle. "Careful, ma'am," he said gently. His name tag read Corporal Jack Miller. Lissel couldn't believe it. This wasn't what she imagined. Inside the camp, things were surprisingly calm. Wooden barracks lined the area, and smoke drifted from a kitchen in the distance. The women were assigned small bunks and blankets. Not luxury, but not cruelty either. One guard even brought them extra bread that evening, whispering, "You must be hungry." Lissel didn't understand much English, but she understood kindness. It startled her. That night, as rain tapped softly on the tin roof, Lissel whispered to her bunkmate, "Annalise, they are not monsters. They are kind." Annalise shook her head. "Don't trust them. They're soldiers." But Lissel couldn't shake what she saw in Jack's eyes. Not power, not pride, but something human, compassion. Days turned into weeks. The camp routine was steady. Mornings began with roll calls. Afternoons, with light work in the kitchen or garden. Lissel was assigned to the medical tent, helping treat small wounds and fevers. To her surprise, the American medic there often let her assist. He'd say with a smile, "Guess you know your way around a bandage, huh?" And she'd smile back shyly. One afternoon, as she was carrying water, she tripped and fell, spilling it all over the dusty ground. Before she could even react, Jack, the same soldier from the gate, rushed to help. "You okay, miss?" he asked, kneeling beside her. His accent was thick, his words slow, but his tone was soft. Lissel nodded quickly, embarrassed. Fine, thank you." He smiled. "You sure? Looks like you took a tumble." For the first time, she laughed a little. Only my pride hurt. That laughter, simple, human, echoed in Jack's mind long after she walked away. In the evenings, the women sometimes sang quietly in German, their voices blending like a distant lullaby under the Texas sunset. The guards listened from afar. Jack found himself drawn to the sound, even if he didn't understand the words. It reminded him of peace, something rare during war. One night, as Lissel sat outside, sketching in her small notebook, Jack walked by. "Those songs," he said, "they sound beautiful." Lissel looked up surprised. "You, like?" He nodded. "Yeah, my grandma used to sing when she cooked." "Not in German, though." Lissel smiled softly. "Maybe same heart, different words." From that night onward, they exchanged small words. Simple, broken English mixed with laughter and hand gestures. The other women noticed, teasing Lissel quietly. "Be careful. He's watching you more than he should," one whispered. Lissel blushed, but said nothing. One afternoon, during kitchen duty, the women were given the chance to bake bread. Lissel volunteered eagerly, her hands remembering the motions her mother taught her long ago. Jack passed by, pretending not to notice, but the smell of warm bread stopped him. "That smells better than anything from our mess hall," he joked. Lissel looked up with a grin. "You hungry?" "Always," he said, laughing. She tore a small piece and offered it shyly through the window. He hesitated, then took it, tasting the warm, soft bread. "Best thing I've had in months," he said honestly. Her smile lingered long after he walked away. Yet deep down, Lissel battled a storm of emotions. Could she really trust an American soldier? Her homeland was burning. Her brothers were missing. Her people suffering. And here she was, feeling warmth toward a man she was supposed to hate. It made no sense, but war had already taken everything from her. Her home, her family, her peace. Perhaps, she thought, kindness was the only thing left worth believing. Jack, too, was conflicted. His country had painted the Germans as the enemy. But when he saw Lissel, scared, tired, but gentle, he couldn't see an enemy at all. Just a woman, trying to survive the same madness. Sometimes at night, he'd stand by the fence, watching the stars. And from the barracks, he'd see her looking up at the same sky. Two souls, separated by wire and war, united by quiet understanding. That winter evening, as the camp celebrated Christmas, the American officers allowed the POS to join in. There was music, laughter, and even a small tree decorated with scraps of paper and tin. Lissel stood near the fire, her cheeks glowing red from the cold. Jack approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Merry Christmas," he said, handing her one. She took it slowly, whispering, "We say, Fro Winnington." He repeated it, clumsily, Fro Uween. She laughed softly, correcting him. "Fro Winnington." He smiled, close enough, as the lights flickered and voices filled the air. Lissel realized something. The war might still be raging beyond the fence, but in this small corner of the world, humanity still existed, and that humanity was slowly turning into something deeper, something dangerous, something neither of them expected. The Texas sun rose over the horizon, painting the camp in soft gold light. Mornings were quiet, the guards making their rounds, the women lining up for bread and coffee. Lissel often saw Jack walking by with his usual calm stride, tipping his hat slightly whenever their eyes met. It became their silent greeting, a moment of unspoken warmth in a place that was supposed to be cold. Weeks turned into months, and the line between guard and prisoner began to blur in small ways. When the camp officers allowed the women to help tend the vegetable garden, Jack volunteered to supervise. They could use some fresh air, he said. The truth was, he simply wanted to see Lissel again. She was different from the others. Gentle, thoughtful, always trying to help the older women who could barely walk. Watching her work in the sunlight, with her hair tied back and her sleeves rolled up, stirred something in him he couldn't explain. Lissel noticed, too. Every time Jack spoke, his voice carried warmth, not authority. When he handed her tools or water, he did it with respect. One day, as they planted new seeds, he said quietly, "You know, you make this place feel less like a camp." She looked up, surprised. "And you make it feel less like prison." He smiled, his heart unexpectedly heavy. He wanted to say more, but words weren't enough to describe what was forming between them. Something fragile, something forbidden. Life in the camp wasn't easy, but compared to what the women had feared, it was almost merciful. They received letters, small rations, and sometimes newspapers with censored headlines. The war in Europe was ending, but none of them knew what would happen next. Would they be sent back? Would their homes even exist? Lissel began spending more time helping in the infirmary again, where Jack often brought supplies. They spoke more freely now. She practiced English with him, and he tried, often failing to pronounce German words. Their conversations started with jokes and small talk, but slowly turned into deeper confessions. One evening, as the camp quieted, Jack found Lissel sitting near the fence, sketching again. "You draw a lot," he said, leaning against a post. "It helps me forget," she replied softly. "What? Forget?" "The noise, the fear, the faces of men shouting orders. I don't want to remember those things anymore." Jack nodded, his gaze distant. "I get that. I've seen things too. Things I don't want to remember either." She turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe we both just need peace." He looked at her, the sincerity in her eyes, the quiet pain hidden beneath her calm. "Yeah," he said finally. "Maybe peace starts with moments like this." As the weeks passed, rumors began to swirl among the guards. Some said Jack was too friendly with the prisoners. Others teased him quietly, calling him the German whisperer. He brushed it off with a laugh, but deep down, he knew they weren't entirely wrong. Something inside him had changed. He no longer saw the camp as a job. It had become a world of its own, with Lissel at its center. One afternoon, a storm hit the camp. Rain poured down, soaking everything. The women rushed to cover their belongings, while guards secured the gates. Lissel was helping an older woman when a strong gust knocked a tent pole loose, hitting her shoulder. She stumbled, crying out in pain. Seeing her from across the yard, sprinted toward her. Without hesitation, he lifted her gently and carried her to the infirmary. The medic frowned. "She's fine, just bruised." But Jack stayed anyway, refusing to leave her side until she smiled again. "You didn't have to," she murmured. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." When she finally looked at him, her eyes glistened. Not from pain, but from the realization that someone cared, a feeling she hadn't felt since the war began. The next morning, she found something by her bed, a small folded paper. Inside was a crude drawing of a flower, and the words, "For the artist who brings light to dark places." It wasn't signed, but she knew who it was from. Lissel smiled for the first time in weeks. She pressed the note close to her chest, before hiding it inside her journal. Later that day, when she passed by Jack near the mess hall, their eyes met briefly. She didn't say a word, but her soft smile was enough. It was their secret, a silent understanding that neither could speak aloud. As the war neared its end, news began spreading through the camp. Germany had surrendered. Some of the women cried, others stood in stunned silence. Lissel felt her heart twist relief, mixed with sorrow. Her homeland was no longer at war, but it was broken, destroyed, unrecognizable. That night, she walked to the edge of the camp and found Jack standing by the fence again. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's over." She looked down, tears filling her eyes. "I don't know what's left for me now." Jack hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe. Start with hope. You still got that, don't you?" She smiled weakly. "Maybe." They stood there, in silence, the warm night wind carrying the faint sound of crickets. For a moment, the world outside the fence didn't matter. All that existed was to people who, by chance, had found kindness in the middle of chaos. But peace was fragile. The camp soon received orders. Many of the prisoners would be transferred. Lissel was among them. Jack tried to hide his disappointment, but the thought of her leaving made his chest ache. On her last day, as the trucks lined up, he approached her one last time. "You'll be okay out there," he said quietly. She nodded. "You too, Jack." There was a long pause, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then, in a moment of courage, she reached out and pressed something into his hand, a small folded sketch of two hands, reaching through barbed wire. "So you remember," she whispered. Jack swallowed hard. "How could I ever forget?" As the truck pulled away, their eyes met one last time through the dust and sunlight. The distance grew, but neither looked away until the road turned and she was gone. For the rest of his life, Jack kept that sketch in his pocket, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of war, love could bloom quietly, defiantly, between two hearts on opposite sides of the wire. The war was over, but its shadows never really left. Lissel returned to a Germany she could barely recognize. Streets turned to dust, homes reduced to empty shells. She tried to rebuild, painting to survive, sketching faces she remembered from the camp. Every stroke of her pencil carried a question she could never answer. Did he make it home? Did he forget me? Back in Texas, also found the quiet unbearable. The ranch looked the same, but the nights felt empty. Sometimes he'd sit on the porch, staring at the horizon, hearing echoes of her voice in the wind. He told himself it was just memory, but he still carried her drawing in his pocket. Years passed. Lissel opened a small art shop. Her drawings became known for their gentleness, women in sunlight, faces with distant smiles. One day, a journalist asked, "Why do your paintings always show hope?" She smiled softly. "Because once, someone showed me kindness when I least deserved it." Across the ocean, Jack worked his fields in silence. Every now and then, letters came from old comrades who'd gone to Europe to visit memorials. He never replied, afraid that writing might break the fragile peace he'd built. Yet deep down, he knew something was unfinished. Then, one spring morning, a letter arrived from a veterans association. Inside was a leaflet for art from both sides, an exhibition of humanity and memory. The sample picture on the front stopped his heart. Two hands reaching through broken wire, her drawing. For days, he couldn't sleep. At last, he packed his old jacket, boarded a ship to Europe, and followed the address printed on the invitation. Munich, 1960. He shook his head. "Every sunrise back home, I remembered. You gave me something to hold on to, when everything else felt wrong. When the gallery closed, they stood outside beneath the evening sky. The city was alive again, children, laughing, bells ringing in the distance. "It's strange," she whispered. "All that time, we were just trying to survive. And yet, even then, there was kindness." Jack nodded. "That's what wins in the end." Before leaving, he handed her a small folded photo, the same Texas sunrise he'd once sent years ago. "If you ever need peace," he said softly, "come see it yourself." She smiled, pressing the photo to her heart. "Maybe I will." As he walked away, neither looked back. They didn't need to. The past had finally found its ending, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. And somewhere between two worlds that had once been enemies, a quiet promise lived on. That kindness, once given, never truly fades.